The lock clicked. That sound, the sharp, cold bite of metal meeting metal, was the final punctuation mark on 40 years of being a mother. I stood there on the porch in my good Sunday dress, the one with the pearl buttons I'd saved for special occasions, watching my own flesh and blood turn the deadbolt. It was raining, that thin, miserable October drizzle that soaks you to the bone before you even realize you're wet. My son, James, wouldn't look at me through the glass, but Jessica did. She stood right there in the foyer of the house I helped them buy, her arms crossed over her cashmere sweater, wearing a look of such pure, unadulterated triumph that it made my stomach turn. 20 minutes. That's how long it took them to reduce my entire existence to 2 battered suitcases and a cardboard box that was already softening in the damp air. "You're too set in your ways, Maggie," she'd said, her voice as sharp as a paring knife. "The children are confused. We need our space." James had just stood there. My boy. The one I'd raised alone on waitressing tips and sheer prayer after his father walked out in '88. He'd looked at his shoes like they were the most interesting thing in the world. Little did they know, as I stood there on that porch, feeling like yesterday's garbage, that I was about to become the most expensive mistake they ever made. Because, honey, let me tell you something. Revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's best served with a side of pure, unadulterated success and a view from a mansion they'll never be invited to enter. My name is Margaret Williams, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old now, and if you're watching this from your kitchen table or your quiet living room, I want you to listen close. I'm going to tell you how a 60-year-old widow went from a 43-a-night motel to owning the most prestigious estate in Millbrook Heights. And I did it all by leaning into the one thing they thought made me weak, my heart. But before we get to the mansion and the millions, you need to understand the silence. 12 years of it. 12 years of birthdays I spent alone, of graduations I wasn't invited to, and of cold winters where the only thing keeping me warm was the fire in my belly that refused to go out. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people you love most, subscribe and stay with me. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps an old woman feel a little less alone in this big digital world. The taxi ride to the Sunset Motel on Route 9 was the longest 3 miles of my life. The driver, a young man with headphones on, didn't say a word. He just heaved my suitcases onto the oil-stained pavement and drove off, his tail lights disappearing into the mist like 2 fading embers. I stood there, clutching my purse. I had $8.47. That was it. That was the life insurance my husband, Frank, had left behind after the hospital bills took the rest. James and Jessica had taken my Social Security checks for months, claiming it was for the family fund, but I knew better now. That fund had gone into Jessica's granite countertops and the designer rug I wasn't allowed to walk on with my shoes. The Sunset Motel smelled like industrial-strength bleach and 40 years of stale cigarettes. Mr. Patterson, the clerk, was a man who looked like he'd seen everything and liked none of it. He slid a plastic key card across the counter without looking up. "Room 14. Checkouts at 11. "Thank you," I whispered. My voice felt small, like a bird with a broken wing. That first night, I didn't even unpack. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning under my weight, and watched the neon vacancy sign flicker outside the window. Red, then dark. Red, then dark. It felt like a heartbeat. I'm still here, it seemed to say. I'm still here. I woke up the next morning at 5 a.m., just like I had for 40 years. My first instinct was to go to the kitchen and start the coffee, to get the oatmeal going for my grandkids, Emma and Tony. Then, the silence hit me. No pitter-patter of little feet, no James grumbling about his tie. Just the sound of a dying air conditioning unit and the roar of a semi-truck passing on the highway. I cried then. I let myself go. I sobbed until my ribs ached and my Sunday dress was wrinkled beyond repair. But when the sun finally crawled over the horizon, something changed. I looked at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. My eyes were red. Yes. My skin was lined with the maps of 1,000 worries. But my jaw? My jaw was set. I'd worked 3 jobs to put James through college. I'd survived a husband's long illness. I'd lived through recessions and heartbreaks. If Jessica thought I was going to wither away in a motel room, she didn't know the woman who raised the man she married. Survival is a habit, honey. And I was back in practice. Every morning for the next 2 weeks, I walked 3 miles to the public library. It was my sanctuary. It was warm, it was free, and it had the internet. I sat there among the teenagers and the drifters, typing with 2 fingers, looking for anyone who would hire a 60-year-old woman with a gap in her resume. That's where I saw the flyer for Mitchell's Garden Center. Help wanted. Bookkeeper, office assistant. Must be comfortable with dirt. I walked there. I didn't have the bus fare to waste. By the time I arrived, my feet were blistered, but I straightened my shoulders and walked into Sarah Mitchell's office. Sarah was a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of an old oak tree, tough, knotted, and deeply rooted. She took one look at my resume, then at my dusty shoes, then back at me. "You're a bit overqualified for $15 an hour, Maggie," she said, her voice like gravel. "I don't need a career, Sarah," I told her, looking her dead in the eye. "I need a life, and I know how to make numbers behave." I didn't tell her I was living in a motel. I didn't tell her my son had thrown me out. I just showed her how her inventory system was leaking money like a cracked bucket. By noon, I was hired. But it wasn't the bookkeeping that saved me. It was the dead row. At the back of the garden center, there was a graveyard. Hundreds of plants, azaleas with brown leaves, wilted hibiscus, ferns that looked like they'd been through a fire. "What happens to those?" I asked Sarah after my first week. "Dumpster," she sighed. "Once they go brown, customers won't touch them. It's a waste, but that's the business." I looked at a little rose bush, its stems shriveled, one tiny green bud clinging to life at the bottom. It looked exactly how I felt. "Can I take them?" I asked. "Instead of a bonus? Just let me take the ones you're throwing away." Sarah laughed. "Honey, if you want to haul away my trash, be my guest." That winter, I moved from the motel to a tiny studio apartment above Yeppe's Pizza. It was loud, and it always smelled like pepperoni, but it had a south-facing window. I filled that window. Then I filled the corners. Then I filled the bathroom. I spent my nights at the library, researching plant dormancy and root rot. I learned that most things aren't dead. They're just tired. They've been overwatered by people who didn't understand them, or neglected by people who didn't care. They just needed the right soil, a little pruning, and someone to wait out the winter with them. I talk to those plants. I know, you probably think I'm a crazy old lady. But when you have no one else to talk to, a Boston fern becomes a very good listener. You're going to make it, I'd whisper as I trimmed away the dead bits. You've got strong roots. Just wait for the light. By March, my apartment was a jungle. A beautiful, vibrant, screaming green jungle. That little rose bush, it hadn't just survived. It had tripled in size and was covered in deep, velvety red blooms. I loaded 20 of those dead plants into a borrowed cart and wheeled them back to Mitchell's. When Sarah saw them, she dropped her coffee mug. Maggie, where did you buy these? I didn't buy them, Sarah. I finished them. These are the ones from the dumpster. She touched a leaf like she was touching gold. I can sell these for $40 a piece. Then sell them, I said, and give me 20%. That was the birth of Phoenix Plant Recovery. But while my plants were blooming, my heart was still in a deep freeze. Every Sunday, I'd take the bus out to James's neighborhood. I'd sit on the bench across the street from their house, hidden behind a large oak tree. I'd watch Emma and Tony play in the yard. They were growing so fast. Emma was getting tall, her hair in a ponytail, just like mine used to be. Tony was obsessed with a little red scooter. One afternoon, James came out to get the mail. He looked tired. He looked old. For a second, I wanted to run across the street. I wanted to yell, "James, it's Mom, I'm okay." But then Jessica came out. She put her hand on his shoulder, whispered something in his ear, and he laughed. A real, genuine laugh. The pain that ripped through me was worse than the night they kicked me out. They hadn't just survived without me. They were happy. They'd replaced me like a piece of broken furniture and moved on with their lives. I got back on the bus, my hands shaking. I realized then that I was waiting for them to fail so I could be the hero who saved them. But life doesn't always work like a Hallmark movie, honey. Sometimes the people who hurt you don't even realize they did it. That was the night I stopped being a victim. I stopped looking across the street and started looking at the soil in my own hands. If they didn't want me in their world, fine. I would build a world so big they couldn't help but see it from their front porch. By year 3, I wasn't just Sarah's bookkeeper. I was her partner. We'd expanded Phoenix Plant Recovery to 3 locations. I'd patented a specific organic recovery soil blend that worked wonders on stressed perennials. I met Eleanor Rodriguez at a small business seminar. Eleanor was 30 years younger than me, wore power suits that cost more than my first car, and had a mind like a calculator. "You're thinking too small, Maggie," she told me over a lunch I could finally afford. "You're saving plants. You should be saving the industry." She helped me see the bigger picture. Big box stores like Home Depot and Lowe's throw away millions of dollars in plants every year. It's a logistics nightmare for them. "What if we create a franchise?" Eleanor suggested. Phoenix Recovery Centers attached to every major nursery. We take their trash, we fix it, we sell it back to them, or we sell it through our own boutiques. The thought of it made my head spin. I was 63 years old. Most people were looking at retirement brochures, and Eleanor wanted me to start a national corporation. "I'm too old for this, Eleanor," I said. She leaned across the table and took my hand. Her palms were soft, not calloused like mine. "Maggie, you're not old. You're seasoned. There's a difference. People trust a woman with dirt under her fingernails more than they trust a CEO in a suit. Use that." So I did. We applied for a small business administration loan. 47 pages of paperwork. I sat in that mahogany-paneled bank office, wearing a new suit and my mother's old pearl necklace. The loan officer, a man who looked like he'd never spent a day out of the air conditioning, smirked at me. "Mrs. Williams, this is a very ambitious plan for someone in your demographic." I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small pot. Inside was a vibrant, blooming orchid. 6 months ago, "This was a stick in a pile of mulch, sir," I said, my voice steady. "I turned that stick into a $30 retail item. Now imagine I do that 1 million times a year. Are you going to be the man who told the woman who can raise the dead that she's too ambitious?" I got the loan. The next 5 years were a blur of airplanes, greenhouses, and spreadsheets. Phoenix Plant Recovery went from a local secret to a regional powerhouse. I was no longer Maggie the bookkeeper. I was Margaret Williams, the plant whisperer of Wall Street. My net worth hit 1 million, then 2, then 5. But money is just paper, honey. It doesn't hug you back. I still lived in a modest apartment. I still drove a reliable SUV. I kept my life quiet. I didn't reach out to James, not yet. I knew if I went to him with money, he'd take it out of guilt or greed, and I didn't want either. I wanted him to see me, the real me. Then came the day I saw the news. A local business journal featured a story on the housing crisis in Millbrook, and there, in the background of a photo about rising foreclosure rates, was James and Jessica's house. It had a notice of default taped to the front door. My heart stopped. I did some digging. James had been laid off from his middle management job a year prior. He'd tried to start a consulting firm that went belly up in 6 months. Jessica, bless her heart, hadn't changed her spending habits. They were drowning. I sat in my office, looking at the photos of my grandkids I'd printed from their public social media pages. Emma was a senior in high school now. Tony was a star athlete. And they were about to lose everything. This was the moment. I could have called them. I could have written a check and been the good mother. But I remembered the rain. I remembered the sound of that lock clicking. If I saved them now, they'd never learn. They'd just think of me as an ATM with a pulse. No, I had a better plan. A plan that required the Harrison estate. The Harrison estate was the crown jewel of Millbrook Heights. It was a 12,000 square foot colonial masterpiece sitting on the highest hill in the county. From the back deck you could see the entire valley. And if you had a pair of binoculars, which I did, you could see right into the backyard of James's modest colonial 3 miles below. I bought it in cash. $3.8 million. I moved in on a Tuesday. I didn't bring much furniture. I wanted the house to feel like I did. Vast. Quiet. and full of potential. I waited for the real estate transfers to hit the Friday paper. In a town like Millbrook, everyone reads the big sales column. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. I was sitting in my glass-walled conservatory, sipping tea and tending to a rare, variegated monstera. The doorbell rang. I didn't rush. I let the chimes echo through the marble foyer. I checked the security camera. There they were. They looked smaller than I remembered. James was wearing a suit that was a little too tight, his face pale and puffy. Jessica was dressed to the nines, probably her last good outfit, clutching a designer bag like a shield. The kids were behind them, looking bored and confused. I opened the door. "Mom?" James's voice was a whisper. It broke on the word. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just stood there in my silk robe, looking at them like they were strangers asking for directions. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Maggie." Jessica stepped forward, her fake sweet smile wide enough to show all her teeth. We saw the paper. We couldn't believe it. This house. It's magnificent. Why didn't you tell us you were back in town?" "I never left town, Jessica," I said calmly. "I've been right here for 12 years. James stepped forward, his eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, we've missed you so much. The kids talk about you all the time." That was a lie. I could see it in Emma and Tony's eyes. They didn't know me. I was a ghost story their parents told them. "Is that right, James?" I turned to the teenagers. "Hello, I'm Margaret, your grandmother." Emma looked at me, her eyes widening. "You're the one who moved to Florida?" I looked at James. He flinched. "Is that what you told them? That I moved away?" "We didn't want them to be upset," James mumbled. "Well," I said, stepping back and opening the door wider. "Since you're here, you might as well come in. I'd hate for you to stand out in the rain. I know how uncomfortable that can be." The walk through the house was silent, save for the gasps from Jessica. She kept touching the wallpaper, the light fixtures, the marble. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She saw a lifeline. She saw a way out of her foreclosure. We sat in the grand living room. I didn't offer them tea. "We're in trouble, Mom," James said, skipping the small talk. He was always a bad liar. "The bank? They're taking the house. I lost my job. I've made some bad choices." "He made mistakes," Jessica added quickly. "But we're a family, and family sticks together. That's what you always taught James, right?" I leaned back in my chair. "It is what I taught him. It's a shame he had such a short memory." "Maggie, please," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This house has 7 bedrooms. It's much too big for one person. We could move in, help you look after the place. The kids could get to know you. We could be a family again." I looked at my grandchildren. They looked like good kids, but they were being used as pawns, just like I was. "I have a better idea," I said. Jessica's eyes lit up. "I know about the foreclosure," I continued. "And I know about the credit card debt. I've already bought your mortgage from the bank." James gasped. You saved the house?" "No, James. I bought the debt. I am now your landlord." The room went ice cold. "You have 30 days to vacate," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "The house will be sold," The proceeds will go into a trust fund for Emma and Tony's college education. You and Jessica will not have access to a single penny of it. You can't do that, Jessica shrieked, standing up. We have nowhere to go. I believe the phrase you used was figure it out. You're a grown woman, I reminded her. I'm sure you'll find that same independence quite useful now. James was sobbing now, his head in his hands. Mom, how can you be so cruel? I stood up. I walked over to him and lifted his chin so he had to look me in the eye. Cruelty, James, is throwing a widow onto a porch in the rain with $800 to her name. Cruelty is lying to your children for 12 years and telling them their grandmother didn't love them. What I'm doing isn't cruelty. It's a lesson. And it's the most valuable thing I've ever given you. I turned to Emma and Tony. You two are welcome here any time. My driver will pick you up for dinner next Sunday. We'll start there. We'll get to know each other without the lies. They looked at their father, then at me. Emma was the first to nod. Okay, she whispered. I'd like that. I showed them to the door. As they walked down the grand steps, Jessica turned back, her face twisted with rage. You think you've won, don't you? You're just a lonely old woman in a big, empty house. I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had in 12 years. I might be old, Jessica, but I'm not lonely. I have my plants. I have my dignity. And unlike you, I have a home that nobody can ever take away from me. I closed the door. I didn't lock it, not yet. I didn't need to. The fence and the security team would handle the rest. I walked back to the conservatory. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the floor. I picked up my watering can and moved among my rescues. Some people think that once a plant goes brown, it's gone. They think that once a woman hits 60, she's invisible. They think that family is something you can discard when it becomes inconvenient. But they're wrong. Everything deserves a second chance, honey. But you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to sit in the dark, to wait through the winter, and to grow your own damn sunshine. I looked down the hill. In a few weeks, James and Jessica would be moving into a small apartment. Maybe they'd learn to appreciate what they had. Maybe they wouldn't. That wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I sat in my chair, the silence of the mansion feeling not empty, but full. Full of the life I'd built with my own two hands. If you're sitting in your own motel room right now, wondering if it's too late to start over, I want you to look at me. It is never too late to bloom. You just need the right soil. And sometimes, you have to be your own gardener. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a long road, but the view from here, it's absolutely beautiful. Before you go, tell me, have you ever had to find the strength to walk away from someone you love to save yourself? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. We're all in this garden together, after all. Good night, honey. And remember, keep reaching for the light.